Welcome back to Positive Texans Radio and HALT and Call for Backup. Today, we're honored to be joined by Dennis Carradin, a licensed trauma therapist, former first responder, and founder of the Trauma Survivors Foundation. Dennis's work focuses on critical incident stress, cumulative trauma, and how prolonged exposure to high-stress environments impacts performance, safety, and life outside the job. He developed Critical Incident Response Strategies, a training program that equips first responders, clinicians, and leadership teams to identify early warning signs, respond effectively after critical incidents, and reduce the risk of long-term psychological injury. Dennis is known for his straightforward, practical approach grounded in real-world experience rather than theory, empty reassurance, or power-through-it messaging. He has trained thousands of professionals across law enforcement, fire, and EMS, healthcare, and other high-risk industries. This is a powerful conversation about trauma, resilience, and what it truly takes to stay human in this line of work. Dennis, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, especially for that introduction. I always question who is that guy that they're talking about, and then I figure out it's me, and I'm like, wow, I'm impressive.
Yes, you are.
Well, thank you.
Dennis, tell us about your background a bit. You got a lot of initials after your last name.
It's the alphabet soup, you start just gaining. It's kind of like potato chips. You can't get one degree or one license. You have to get multiple. So I was initially licensed in 1996 and licensed at the master's level, and then went on for the PhD training. Nationally certified counselor, board certified expert in traumatic stress, diplomat for the American Academies and Experts in Traumatic Stress. I am a former firefighter and an EMT, and I always say my greatest initials are DAD. I am a dad beyond dad. So, outside of anything that I do, and I always tell people, like, look, we could talk theory, we could talk science, but if you really, really, really want to get to know me, then somewhere out there is a picture of me as a pretty, pretty princess because my 4-year-old put a unicorn helmet on me and painted my fingernails. So that's who I am. Yeah, we started the Trauma Survivors Foundation. I've been in practice for now almost 30 years. We're actually 2026 will be my 30th year. And my entire focus in that time has been on first responders, healthcare workers, and really have just kind of developed theory based on actual practice versus the other way around, so it's been fun. And that's me.
What's the backstory to you? How did you get to where you are today? What did you mention? You were a firefighter, EMT. You're probably like me, a lifelong EMT, because it's once you get that certification, you don't want to let it go.
Well, I was born and bred Wilmington, Delaware, and I think, a lot of us in the Northeast area, you kind of look at service more than anything else. You look at charitable and service, and I'm not saying that's not in other regions of the world. It's just, it's pretty blue collar around here. And I ended up joining when I was 16 years old, joined a local fire company, as a junior firefighter. I hit 18, got my EMT, weren't allowed to get it until then. And then I decided to go against all my family values and actually go to college where, my father I always say he works for Chrysler University. My dad was an auto mechanic with Chrysler. It was just, I grew up with police. I grew up with firefighters. I had friends, family. That's who we are. And I fell in love with medical science. So when I first got into college, I wanted to be a family physician. That made complete sense to my father. When I went to him and I said, "Hey, Pop, I want to be a doctor." And that made sense. It was like, okay, well, that's good. My sophomore year, after meeting one of my mentors, a Dr. Pat Krantz, you have to know this force of nature to know how she changed the way I thought. She was about 913 years old when I first met her, and she would drive around campus in this twin turbo Z with the T-tops and playing like Iron Butterfly. And I mean, she was a hippie, but she was the coolest psychologist I knew. And she started shaping the way that I fell in love with psychology. That was her, and so I go back at a Christmas break. I had already accumulated all of these credits about, inorganic chemistry, organic chemistry, all this great stuff. And I go back and I sit down with my mom and dad and I said, hey, I want to be a therapist. I want to be a psychologist. And my dad looked at me and said, yeah, I don't know what that is. And I was like, well, we talk to people and help things. And he goes, like a priest? And I said, yeah, but I still like women, Dad. And he's like, oh, okay, well, that's good. Keep going. So, so
Nice, your dad.
yeah, it's Pop. My mom still says, he's a doctor, but not a real doctor. So I get it, and love her to death for it. So from there, I ended up going into, I had only wanted to be an owl. I only wanted to go to Temple University. They had at the time the best cognitive behavioral therapy program, which they still are. They're world rated for it. But I knew that was what was emerging in the world of first responders, is that cognitive behavioral therapy was the way to go, was the way to kind of work with it. And I didn't want to get into psychiatry. I kind of felt the path of where psychiatry was going, of 5-minute med checks and giving people just medications, not really doing therapy. So that wasn't me. So when I got into it, I then was recruited by my next mentor, who was a 35-year veteran of the Philadelphia Fire Department. He was a professor over at LaSalle University, but he was on the EAP with the Philadelphia Fire Department at the same time and had just started the first CISM team. So long story, when Jeff Mitchell and George Everly started critical incident stress debriefings and eventually critical incident stress management, there was only 3 teams that started. One was in Maryland, one was in Philadelphia, and then they brought it down to Wilmington, Delaware. So the Delaware CISM team was the 3rd team ever developed. And Al said, well, you're from Wilmington. And I went, you're right. And he said, and you're going to be a part of that team. And I was like, okay. And so in the history of that team, it was developed in 89, 90. I have been the 2nd clinical director in that entire time. First was a Army veteran, was a Vietnam veteran, Mark Kofke, that worked with the VA, and he was working directly with the fire department. Since that time, I caught the trauma bug, and it was, what can I do to develop my skills better to help first responders and healthcare workers? So got all the certificates, got all the training, did all the debriefings, and here we are today. Now we were 2013, had started the Trauma Survivors Foundation, wrote my first, few books, have a couple in the works, and here I am. So it's been interesting. It's been an interesting ride.
Yeah. It's so critical too to understand, especially having people like you and Jim out there that are really doing good trauma work. Because it's hard enough to get first responders, because we're both former, I was law enforcement. Actually, Jim was law enforcement too. Uh, it's hard to get first responders to say that they have issues. First of all, to have the departments buy in on it and say, okay, I want my troops to get help, and make sure that the stigma isn't so thick, because a lot of us just wear this badge and we think that we're untouchable. But trauma work is very important to understand as a clinician, to give that credibility to others, that they can come to you with that trust, and they know that you have that knowledge and that care and empathy. Um,
I agree 100%. It's, we talk about credos, that credibility, that ethos, that ethical responsibility. I had that epiphany the other day with one of my fraternity brothers. This man's known me since 1988. And I sat down with him and I said, I didn't realize how most of my adult life has been based in secrecy. And he goes, I'll be your nod man when you start going a little crazy in the head and you start saying things. He goes, I'll make sure we put a bullet in your brain. And I was like, thanks, man. He goes, no, you got to look at it. He goes, how many, and you can't even count this number, but how many law enforcement officers, how many, firefighters, how many FBI agents, how many nurses, doctors have you seen over your lifetime that have given you unbelievable sensitive information? And I looked down and I was like, wow, now I am a little afraid of myself going crazy. Thank you. But it's true. It's the credibility that it takes years to develop it, and it literally will take seconds to destroy it,
Mm.
especially in the first responder world.
Yeah, that's a
One,
really good point. Definitely, 100%. I mean, I was a cop for 20 years or 19 years, and we don't trust a lot of people. And all it takes is that you might have a great game face, you might have some really good stuff to say, but that one time that lose that credibility, it spreads like wildfire for sure.
yeah, departments talk, and especially in this area, and I would assume it's in any area, where you have, if we look at the numbers, and I always talk about the numbers, you have 1.1 million certified officers in the United States. You have 800,000 paid and volunteer firefighters. You have 50,000 EMTs. You have 20,000 paramedics. You mean you're not going to tell me that somebody can't do a quick flash to everybody to say this guy isn't worth it? I mean, come on, that's a little ridiculous that ultimately you are looking at such a small portion of society that is the most closed, but also the most loyal and dedicated. And it's when you get into that society, whether you get in the way I did, which, was being a part of the first responder world, but also, through the EAPs, through the CISM teams. But when you get into that, it's an honor. And you should hold it in an extreme level like that. That should never be broken. At least my take on it. There might be other people that would disagree with me, but I haven't seen it any other way.
I've seen it both ways too, and I think Jim has also, and we've talked about it before, is where I mean, I've worked in the clinical realm of recovery since I left law enforcement, and I tell the guys that I deal with and the girls, kick the tires, come in, ask those questions because I know the trust thing is a huge thing, but just sit down with a therapist, a clinician, a case manager, or whatever, and start diving deep into those things when you feel safe enough. And you might not feel safe for the first couple sessions, but don't give up on yourself. And when you start feeling those little twinges inside saying like, oh, you know what, this is getting a little bit deep, I want to leave. Jim says it a lot too, but do the opposite of how you feel, right? So
Right. I get it. It's funny. We get the newbies, right? Everybody that goes to therapy. And then all of a sudden they start realizing that it's helpful. And I have, officers, firefighters, what have you, nurses, docs that have seen me now for years. And it's moved from the crisis response, like something bad has happened, whether it was a shooting, a bad run. And now they're coming in just kind of like for the offloading for life coaching, and I never, I don't hold people and I think this is any good clinician. You don't hold people when it's not necessary, but you think the dynamic life that a first responder lives or a healthcare worker lives, there is always some sort of issue that happens on a week-to-week basis. I was just giving a lecture at my alma mater at Temple University, and we specifically discussed the amount of critical incidents that a first responder sees in their lifetime and or at least in their 20 years, we'll say, of working. And the average citizen, the person out there in the world, is probably only going to see 3 to 4 critical incidents. And it's most likely the death of someone, it's a bad car accident, fire, whatever it is. In any given career, a first responder is going to see anywhere from 200 to 1,000 critical incidents that have affected them, not including the day-to-day stuff. We joked around a little bit and said, like, how old were you when you saw your first dead body as a first responder? And almost every single person in this group, and there was about 30, 35 in this group, everyone said that they saw their first body before the age of 21, their first dead body before the age of 21. Where I have people, in my little circles of the world that their first dead body they saw was Mima or Mamam at 82 years old. And so
Yeah.
you got to think about how that really kind of affects a person, over a lifetime and over a career.
Especially, you talk about that, the acute trauma that we absorb, the first ones that we see are the kind of in the here and now. And then to Dennis's point, that chronic timeline of traumatic events over and over and over and over again. And one of the things, like, to refer back to what Mike was talking about and what Dennis was saying is, not every emergency responder will connect with a, you know, emergency responder experienced, meat in the seat clinician. But a great majority of them do, and some don't, and that's fine too because they're connecting with whoever they need to connect with. And more power to all of us that are in this profession. We need everybody to help everybody out. What is that saying? It takes a village. One of the things that we were discussing was how easy it is for emergency responders to have this experience, the meat in the seat, and now they're therapists, and how we can connect so quickly with these emergency responder clients that are coming in. And a lot of them ask those questions. Well, have you ever seen a dead body before? Yeah, multiple. Have you ever been through trauma before? Yeah, absolutely. And they start testing us to see, do we have congruence for them? Do we really understand what they're going through? And there's something very special about that when you see the change in them. You see them soften their stance with us, and the next thing you know, somebody who was very difficult to communicate with is now becoming more and more forthcoming, and they actually look forward to the sessions. And they say this every time: "I feel better just for talking." Just for finally, Jim, there's things I'm talking about right now that I've never told anybody. And the other piece too is they keep checking in. This is confidential, right? Yeah, it just depends, right? Because we're all mandated reporters, so it just depends. But for right now, you're doing great. Keep going. So they always want to test the water, and then when they dive in, and then you see the change, and they tell you about the change, the positive reactions. It's a beautiful thing. And that's Dennis. What about you? I love those moments.
God, absolutely. I had patients yesterday morning, and one of mine he's a 16-year Wilmington police officer. No, not breaking confidentiality because there's a bunch of them. So, but he came in, and he was dancing around the subject. And when you dance around a subject, a lot of times, the focus of a non-trained therapist is to continue the dance. And I think the focus of a first responder or somebody that has the meat in the seat, basically, I went after him, and I will say it was one of those aha moments for the both of us. And one of the big things that I look at is not just the test, that they give you, and I think you're right. They test you constantly. They try to, I call it sink the shrink, right? They try to
Yes.
test you. And when I come back at them, they don't know what to do with it. So it's pretty funny. Like out here, and I don't know out in your area if you use 10 codes. We use 10 codes out here. And I know, some areas use common language or whatever it is, and or plain language. And, when I know all the 10 codes and I know, the different areas and all, they just look at me and they're like, yeah, that's why my sergeant told me to come and talk to you. I was like, well, look at it. There's a difference between therapists in the world. Again, numbers wise, there's 225,000 licensed therapists in the United States. There are less than 500 that work specifically with first responders and healthcare workers. That is a very, very true statement. The problem is that we've started seeing a movement right now, which aggravates me. It really does. And I don't, who am I going to yell at, right? I'm going to yell at Freud or something like that. It's not what I'm going to do, but I will call people out. I don't have a problem of advocating for my first responders and healthcare workers, but we have a movement right now in the healthcare world that started a little bit before the pandemic, but then exploded after the pandemic, is that there are therapists that are viewing first responders and healthcare workers as an untapped resource because the majority of the time they have state insurance that's very good insurance policies. So now these workers are doing I don't know, like a weekend seminar to become a trauma-informed therapist and have no background whatsoever. And then they're putting themselves out there. That actually does more harm than it does good. So I do agree. It's whoever you connect with, but there are ones that are billing themselves as a first responder trauma therapist, and they are not. And that does create problems. And so what happens is those folks will eventually make it to my office, and I'm having to undo therapy versus just provide therapy.
I
That's
love,
sorry,
yeah,
Mike, go.
I love that you're talking about this right now, because I was thinking as you're talking about therapists, I saw a clip of you recently exactly about this, and you had a lot of passion to it.
I got a little
A lot
fired
of
up.
passion. You got fired up, and I love that. I love that about you, because you talked about that, and like you just said right now, those 500 licensed therapists that deal with trauma and first responders, okay, across the nation, but then there's this movement of these 2-3 day classes on how to be a trauma therapist, and you could do more damage than you can do good if you're not actually living it and actually practiced it, and you're saying you're something that you're not. You can really do, and it's a niche, right? Okay, well, the first responders need help, and let's just jump on the bandwagon and get all these guys help, and making sure we're doing these trauma, informed therapy sessions with them. But a lot of times we're opening up things and we can't close them. Like for me, I mean, I've been working as a clinician. I'm not a therapist, but I, got my CADAC, a drug and alcohol counselor, and I started back in 2013. And I've been in a couple situations like you guys probably had early in your careers as a therapist, where you open it up and then you're going, what do they say about closing? How do I close the gap before they leave my office? Because I don't want them to be more traumatized when they leave. And I don't want, like, you calling them on their bullshit, is like, let's not dance around this thing. Let's get to the heart of it right now and take care of it, instead of them saying, I'm good, let's leave my office. And a lot of therapists and a lot of therapy and recovery gets a bad name too, because of these things. We get a bad name because, hey, I don't trust this therapist. They did this and this. I'm not going to go back. And it's a great conversation to have. But I did see that clip, and I'm like, that is great. I'm glad you're putting that stuff out there, because we're right on board with that.
That one, and that goes back to somebody that was billing themselves as a trauma therapist, and they had worked in the prisons for 4 years with inmates. And I went, and so, I got stitched by a buddy online, and I went in and I looked at it, and I went through it, and this person was calling her first responder patients her firsties. And I said, are are they Taylor Swift fans? I was so fired up after seeing that. Like I try to stay buttoned up. That's kind of my response to things. If I try to stay calm, I'm fairly stoic. But man, that fired me up. That was one of those ones that I said, no, you're going to hurt someone. You can actually cost someone's life because of your ineptness. And if you look at the three therapists out there, right? You have the trauma-informed therapist. That only means that you understand that trauma somehow has affected the way that the person behaves. That's it. There's nothing else other than that training of saying that trauma can affect your cognition, your emotional side, your mentation, and so forth. The second is one that specializes in trauma. Well, that's great. Most of the people that specialize in trauma typically are referring to domestic violence, rape survivors, what have you, car crashes, maybe, what have you. But then at the end of the day, you have a trauma therapist. That's somebody that has been through the muck and the mire, that are on scenes, that are working hand in hand with first responders, healthcare workers. You find them in the different agencies and so on. So yeah, I would always caution a first responder. I would always caution them. Know the background of that therapist. Really vet them out. I actually did a few videos on TikTok and Instagram, even on my Facebook, about vetting out a trauma therapist. Ask the hard questions. If you ask them, well, tell me about how you do therapy, and they give you something that sounds like a TED talk,
Mm.
stop it. That's not the one for you. Or if they get defensive if you ask questions, Like I'll have guys in there that, I haven't seen it, and some of the tough nuts to crack are my troopers, they're fine, but we got good veins with them. And they'll sit down and they'll be like, just tell me how this process works. Okay, boom, here it is. And without hesitation, if I get defensive, they're walking out of the room. I had and not to, it's just how he responded. He was great. We recently had a line of duty death in Delaware. We had one of our troopers was murdered, and
Okay.
and they were struggling. They were absolutely struggling. And a group of the troopers had come to see me privately, and one of them started discussing a therapist, and I went, "Oh, you went to go see her," and he goes, "You know her?" And I said, "Yeah," and she goes, "Well, please make sure that you tell her she's absolutely out of her mind crazy." And I said, "I've heard that multiple times. For some reason, she got on some list for troopers to go to, and she is completely inappropriate for a state trooper. She starts the meeting by burning sage and talks about crystals." And I went, "That
Yeah.
no,
That's
troopers
gonna
may shoot
scare
you."
people away.
Yeah.
And what would be three important questions to ask a therapist?
Great question. I'm actually going to tell you how to build a clock before I give you the time. So during that nasty little thing we called the pandemic, my aortic heart valve decided that it needed to come out. So I had open heart surgery during the pandemic and ended up getting a new. I thought I had a piggy, but apparently I have a moo valve. I have a little cow in me. It's actually, I'll eat more chicken, but I like my cow valve.
Wow, I got it in the
Yeah,
blood.
suddenly I'm spelling chicken differently.
Me and Chick-fil-A have a little love
Right?
affair right now. So my surgeon, and I always praise his name, Dr. Joe Bavaria. He's with Penn at the time. He's now with Jefferson in Philadelphia. Afterwards, he gives me a list of 12 therapists. He goes, "Look, man," he goes, "I'm not going to lie to you." He goes, "We gave you 6 months to live and we couldn't get you into surgery for 5 months." He goes, "That puts a lot of strain." He goes, "You know that as a therapist, plus all the things that you've seen, everything that you've done in the pandemic. I mean, I was probably the busiest crisis wise that I've ever been in my life during the pandemic. I actually had a letter from Homeland Security that allowed me to travel anywhere that I could go because of the amount of crisis that we were going. So I go to these 12 therapists because I wanted to vet them out. The first woman I sat down with, I sat in, and all of a sudden, 5 cats started emerging from somewhere. Now, I love animals and all, but not in my therapy session, and not 5 of them. And I looked at her and I literally said, "What the hell is this?" And she goes, "They give positive energy." And I said, "No, they're giving me hives right now." I said, "This is a little weird." And so I never got past any other phase except I sat there and she does this. And so the next guy I went to go sit down with, and he looked at me. He was a younger fella, and he goes, I have to be honest with you. I can't see you as a patient." I was like, "Oh," I said, "Is it my background? Is it?" He goes, "No, no." He goes, "I just really wanted to meet you." He goes, "I've heard a lot about you." And I went, "Dude, are you out of your mind?" Like, it was just like, you could have given me a call. I would have answered. Another guy I met was just he he starts it with, and I don't know what he was trying to do, which I thought was hilarious. We have the main line up here in Pennsylvania, it's Ardmore and Bryn Mawr and all this stuff, so little upper echelon. And I sat down and he goes, "Well, give me your background." And me being the smart ass I am, I was like, "Well, I like long walks on the beach and margaritas and, And he goes, "No, no, no." He goes, "Tell me your background." And I said, "Well," I said, I'm Italian Catholic, from Wilmington, and he looks at me and he goes, "Well, I'm not going to hold that against you." And I went, "E excuse me?" And he goes, "Well, I'm Jewish." And I went, "So what the hell does me being Italian cat like, I didn't do anything to you." It was so bizarre going through these 12. I had another one that cried when I told her what I did. It was
Mm.
really bizarre. So I go back to Joe Bavaria and I have this list and I said, "Look, Joe," I said, "please burn this list, rip it up, shove it up someplace. I said, I just can't deal with this. And he goes, look, I have one more. And I said, do you think I really trust you right now? And he said, no. He goes, I got one more. She's close to you. I live in the Glen Mills area. She's out in media. Go talk to her. Okay. So I go walk in and I looked at her and I came up with the worst possible story just to kind of get her reaction. I walked in and I was like, I was just on a call where a guy ate 3, sheep heads and then he ate his own head. And it was just like, I just went off on this bizarre story. And she stopped and she looked at me and she goes, so are you going to tell me the real story or are you going to stick with that bullshit story? And I went, you're my best friend right now. You're going to be amazing. So she's been a godsend. She really is. Half of our sessions deal with just all the trauma, everything that I go through, with being on scene, doing crisis management. And then the other half is just about being a really good dad and not losing my mind with the kids. So when we go, and here's how we build the clock, right? So when we go to vet somebody, I think number one, you want to ask not just credentials. Anybody can have credentials, right? I could give you my alphabet soup. I could show you all my license in my office. Ask them experience. What is your experience with the first responder world? What's your experience with the healthcare world? What's your experience with another therapist? So start with that question. Now, if they come back to you and they say, like I've heard some of them, well, I worked with the brother of a nurse's husband's firefighter, stop. There has to be experience. You have to have done that. So that's number one. What's your experience? Number two, what does the session look like? What's going to happen during this session? Am I just here and you just want me to talk? Or are you going to ask me questions? Are you going to give me homework? Are you going to give me suggestions? Are you going to give me books to read? Are you going to make me, do a journal? What does this session look like? And then I would, and this one's a tough one. Experience is one thing, but I would ask, how many therapists or how many first responders or healthcare workers have you seen in your career? Really come down to the brass tack of numbers. If the person says, well, I've been in practice for 20 years and I've seen 3, firefighters, I don't know if they'd have enough experience. I don't know if they'd have the numbers that they would need,
Yeah.
And then maybe a fourth question is, what's your affiliations? Are you affiliated with the local, crisis team? Are you affiliated with a fire company? Are you affiliated with the FOP, the IAFF? Are you vetted by any of them? So the FOP, the national FOP, vets out therapists right now, which hopefully gives that credibility to it. And the IAFF are starting to do that as well.
Yeah. And I think all around the country too, they're starting to do that. Different areas are actually getting a list together. I have a list together. I have my own personal list. And you're on it now too, right?
Thank you.
Jim, I haven't got Jim on there yet, but he's working on being on the list somewhere. But and those, it's so important to ask those questions and not to discourage clinicians out there that have a desire to work in this population, but you have to have that desire. You have to have that passion that comes from within. Like, okay, maybe I've never been a first responder before. Maybe I have family members, maybe not, but I have this passion to do this. Just give it time. You're not gonna get it right away. But when I first doing groups and when I first started doing counseling sessions, I mean, I was a cop for 19 years. I interviewed people. I kicked doors in. I arrested people. I protected the public. But then I sat in front of a group of people that were, 20, 25-year-olds and trying to do a group on, alcohol and drugs or whatever it is. It was sort of out of my element, but it just takes time to get comfortable in it. Just don't bullshit them, because if you bullshit us, you're not going to get a really good hold on your future as a therapist.
You lose people right away. It's the human lie detectors are a first responder, healthcare worker. You think about the average cop, right? 20, 25-year career, whatever it is. How often per day are they lied to? You think about it, oh, officer, these aren't even my pants. These are my cousin's pants, or whatever it is. Do you have your license and registration? I don't, this isn't even my car. It's a rental. Well, come on, man. It's the lies that the people hear will automatically say whether you are trustworthy or not. And so when you sit in front of people, and I absolutely respect what you're saying, when you sit in front of people and you lose them quick. It's funny. I started my interns that I take now for the practice are typically police officers. So my intern coming in for the spring right now, 27-year veteran, a lieutenant that's switching over to mental health. And I know he's going to do a great job. He's been on my crisis team for years now, but I know he's going to do a great job. It's hard for me to accept that 22, 23, 24-year-old intern straight out of grad school because of how much learning that has to go into it. I have to get them ride-alongs. I have to get them sitting in the firehouses. I got to get them with the paramedics, got to get them in the ERs. And it's like, this is what we're dealing with. And some of them, in the past broke very quickly. Like they went on their first, ride along and came back and said, this isn't for me. And it's like, well, yeah, absolutely.
Respectable. That's respectable.
Yeah.
Yeah. And on that note too, we as therapists that are specializing with first responders, we're always having those conversations with our clients. Number one, they're struggling in their career. Well, do you want to stay in your career, or is it time to start looking for something else? Or even coming in as like interns or associates, the new therapists. Do you find that you love what you do, or should you start going to plan B? And those are all wise conversations and all wise decisions to make because like Dennis is talking about, we're not dealing, the difference between being an ocean lifeguard and being a therapist comes down to whether or not they're going to offer me a barbecued hamburger. When I'm out there on the beach, I'm everyone's best friend. They all want to, they treat us well, generally speaking. And when you get into therapy, you're literally in the 911 of the 911 people. And it can be unpleasant. And oftentimes, and Dennis, jump in here. Oftentimes, we hear that same kind of quote. This is the first time I've talked about this, and it's deep, and it's deep. And they've been holding on to this forever. And in the moment, it's like watching my dad. My dad would never, World War II, Marine Corps, World War II, Korean War vet, never talk about the war, never talk about anything military wise. And then once in a while, he would let you in and tell you something. He'd have to stand up, excuse himself, and cry. He didn't want us to see him crying because it was just like everything would fall apart at that point. So Dennis, jump in if you have any thoughts on that.
No, absolutely. Most of the time, and I say most, it's not all the time, but most of the time, the first responder that does come in is coming in because they are going through a crisis situation. They were told they should go. They had that dark moment or whatever it is. And just being able to sit in it with them is unbelievable. And I always I tell them, I will carry the weight until you are ready to carry this. The bottom line, I am your guy to do this. And if you're not ready to give me the weight, I get you, I understand, but I'm here for you. And I would say 99% of the time, here, take this. And then when they're ready, we shift it back. It's also, it's wild. I have one of my fraternity brothers he gave me a t-shirt that says I'm the one 911 calls, which I haven't worn it out in public yet. So I'm going to hold that off, but it's wild how that works in our worlds. Like, how does that help us? How does that, factor into play of when we're talking to somebody, how well does this help? So
Sorry.
When a first responder comes in to talk to me, it's normally after a crisis, or they were told to come and talk to me. And when I say told, typically it's from a friend, a colleague, so forth. We do get mandatory referrals or what have you, but I always tell them, I'm here to carry the weight until you're ready to carry the weight. And then they look at me and I said, look, if you're not ready for that, I completely respect that. But I'm here. I'm in front of you. Make sure you give me that weight. And then when they're ready, we hand it back to them. They do great. And it's this huge sigh of relief. You see the arm, the shoulders go down. You see them not as intense anymore. And it's not, I don't want to say there's an addiction to therapy. Maybe there is in the world, but this is more of addicted to feeling not terrible. It's not necessarily about feeling joy and happiness yet. The first few sessions, it's about not feeling terrible. And then sessions after that, it's like, okay, well, let's find that happiness again. Let's find that joy again. And so they get addicted to that beginning of just not feeling terrible.
Good. Nice. Tell us about the books you've written and your presence on social media and podcasts.
It's funny. I never, I had in my background, I think a lot of therapists, a lot of professionals do, I'm going to write a book someday, type of thing. Well, my someday took me 20 years. It wasn't that I was too busy. I think you make time for things, you do whatever. I was in the doing of everything. I still wanted to learn. I still wanted to make sure that if I wrote a book, it would make sense, right? And so I read an author's book. He had been a therapist for I think 6 years. And then he wrote this incredible theory, and I read it and I was like, wow, this is a steaming pile of garbage. This is a terrible, terrible book.
That kind of therapy.
Yeah.
That kind of one.
And I thought it was going to be great. And he had sent me an email and asked if I could review it. And I absolutely, I did. And I came back and I said, you're not going to like my review of it. And he said, well, what do you mean? And I said, you're just going to have to find somebody else, because I didn't appreciate it. So my first book that I came out with was, I wanted to do practical guides. I wanted to do something that if you were a first responder, if you were somebody that ultimately was just doing something in the world to change yourself, what would that be? And so my first book I wrote was called Own Your Bullshit. And it was basically a 30-day guide of just owning your stuff. And so I started with that, and then I wrote the First Responder's Guide to Resiliency. That was my next one, of taking step-by-step approaches to being resilient. So I developed my flagship book, Beyond the Call, which was an approach to resiliency and unbreakable spirit. It was one of those books that I sat down and I said, you know what? I know there's books out there that talk about this, but I wanted to write one that ultimately breaks each profession down. So it broke down firefighters and police and what they need and what they don't need and what you should look for in yourself. Everything that I've written so far has been about building and kind of fortifying yourself. I have 2 books in the works right now. One is on being a trauma therapist. So it's kind of like the chronological nature of my life and the experiences that I've had. Now, again, not breaking any confidentiality, but talking about the overall themes to it. And that one's been the hardest. It's literally doing a lot of self-reflective work and looking at myself and saying, wow, what worked, what didn't work, what helped, what didn't help, what hurt, what were the pain points from it? I spent 4 months down with the Hurricane Katrina relief efforts, and I did a lot. Just a lot down there. And so I was going over that section, and I did myself a disservice, and I watched a Hulu documentary. It was Rush Against Time, Katrina. Probably one of the most accurate, best documentaries that I have ever seen about Hurricane Katrina. And I found myself in the fetal position on the ground crying like a 4-year-old because the memories just flooded back. Not in flashback mode, but how raw it was. So as I was sitting down writing that chapter of my book, I was in that mode of, wow, that actually happened. And I think a lot of us, when we go back to kind of re-experience things, we forget that we are doing these things. We forget that we are on these crisis calls and that we are on these major, major world events. And I always say, it's like, look, what I taught I was an adjunct professor for Penn State for 15 years. And my students would always say, Professor Carradin's he's the one that goes to places that always blow up. And I'm like, pretty much, the shootings, the mass shootings, the floods, the hurricanes. And as I sit back now and I look over, I was like, wow, I actually was there. I actually did that. It's almost this weird self-separation of looking at my life as a movie, and not that I have any grandiose. I'd like Ben Affleck to play me, maybe. I'm not sure, but not even looking at anything in that regard. But it's wild to self-separate, to write this book and say that actually occurred. I actually saw that. I was actually in chest deep water, wading through people's pockets to find identification, dead bodies, and and so forth. And so that book, I think, is going to be not anything more than kind of like, this is how you become a trauma therapist. And if you want this, it's there, and the rewards are incredible, but also understand what you have to go through to get there. And my last one's going to be similar to Beyond the Call. It's going to be healthcare focused, primarily with nurses and firefighters, but it'll be primarily focused on how they could build their own resiliency. And then, I don't know, I will probably write a couple of children's books, because that's where I am right now. Hopefully not about trauma.
Nice.
So those are the books. My my online presence. Funny thing, we were right before the show. We were talking about my manager, Jen. I will throw her name out there. She's amazing. She was an absolute amazing person to ever run into and ever have her agree to actually work with me. Which, I for some reason she'll have to do several novenas and prayers after the work is done. But she has been incredible. She told me, "Hey, why don't you develop a TikTok account?" I was like, "No." And she goes, "No, develop a TikTok account." And I said, "Why?" And she goes, "You give lectures, you give all this stuff, and you just talk about things." And she said, "Just do it on TikTok." And I was like, nobody's really going to follow me. Like, who the hell's going to follow a trauma therapist that talks about first responders? And I think we're bridging over 20,000 people at this point, so it's built up very nicely. I'm on Instagram and Facebook. I tend to, I like writing. I like talking about the stuff that interests me. I also do blogs. We did the Cop and the Shrink podcast. It was more just so that people could understand the real side of what people go through, and primarily focused on first responders and healthcare workers. But I wanted to give people the understanding that we see you, we know you, we understand you. And if I'm telling you something that resonates with you, then that means I touched you in some way that isn't dirty, I guess, but I touched you in some way that made sense to you. And now you're going to come back and you're going to say, wow, this guy gets me. And trust me, there's tons of people out there that do get the first responders and healthcare workers.
And that's where I found you at too when I first went on TikTok, because I wasn't on TikTok. I mean, my kids were on it years ago when it was Musically. Musically was before TikTok. My daughter, my son, we used to play on. I'm like, oh, what's all this stuff? Whatever. I'm not going to do that. But I started doing it in 2025, and then I'm always looking for people that are on the same wavelength that me and Jim are talking about. I want to get good information. There's so much to talk about out here. Whatever is going on the outside, what we do, talking about recovery, resiliency, working with first responders, trauma, it's not going to have a time limit. It's going to keep on going on. Our world events will pass us, but what we're doing right now is timeless, and it's going to grow into something more positive. But I saw you, I'm gonna follow this guy because I want to create a following. And I get excited too, like, oh my God, I got 3 likes. Jim, I got 3 likes. That's great. Oh wait, I'm gonna have 4 likes. One's mine. but you spoke to me. I'm like, oh, this is good. And that's what I found out too. People will listen to podcasts and some won't. Like, this is too long. Our attention span is so short, right? And it's like, oh, a 3 second thing on this. Oh, this is great. Or makes you laugh. Or maybe 30 seconds of this is what I'm about. This is our direction. And that's where we've tried to steer this more where I can take apart a podcast and take out really good parts just to put that out there for people to hear and maybe spark something with them like, oh, I get that now, right? And maybe go in a different direction. And that's what I loved about you and about what you said, and your passion is number one, right? Your passion for this thing is so important because you speak the truth. And when you can see the honesty in someone else and get them, and we get you, and you get them at the same time, it makes life a little bit smoother, where it's like, all right, I'm not alone in all this. Other people are talking about this too.
Yeah, it's that I and you're right, 100%. It's a connection based type of thing. Is that you have people that are, they're doom scrolling and whatever, and you're going past everybody that's trying to sell a long sleeve shirt or some weird shoes, or you get past all those ads, and then you run into that person that's speaking to you, that just says something that like, Wait a minute," and then you go back and then you try to do a deep dive into them and you check out all the videos and so forth, and you say, wow, they're really good. And then if they have a podcast or they have a website, you go to that and you check it out. I have a 35 to 40-minute commute in the morning, and I don't listen to music in the morning. I listen to podcasts or Audible. I listen to books in the morning. And what I find is that I try to listen to the podcast. Like I've listened to you guys. I've listened to a bunch of other ones. If I want to hear what people are saying, because ultimately, if I am here to speak a truth, and the truth about a first responder, truth about a healthcare worker, I have to understand it from multiple levels. I can't just stay in my lane. My lane is one thing. Like I put up, and we talked about it earlier, my little blooper lane. I put up a blooper reel, and it's funny. It's me. I get in there and I'll make jokes and I'll fool around and all that. And there are videos that I've done that at, but I've tried to stay in my lane, but I can't stay in that when it comes to everything. And so I have to be open to ideas. I have to be open to things. And I think that's what I try to express in Connection, is all the different ideas and all the different things. It's always, I am so humbled, and this is a true statement. I firmly believe all of us have to stay humble, and there has to be humility in everything that we do. That I get humbled when I get those little blurbs, like humbled to be on this. I was excited, outside of, and as I told you, outside of me building a Barbie dream house and being a couple of minutes late,
Right.
I was excited to be on this because it gives that ability to go back and forth and connect with another audience and people, two men that I haven't met before. So when
Yeah.
somebody sends me a little message like, "Hey man, that was really great," um, I sit back and I'm like, wow, that mattered to them. And it matters to me. I had somebody send me a message the other day, and I think I was chopping onions at the same time, so my eyes were a little watery. But this person had sent me, "I haven't been through therapy. I've had all these things happen to me. I watched a few of your videos. I made a phone call. The first therapist didn't work out. Then I saw your vetting video, and I vetted the next one. And oh my God, she's been wonderful. And thank you so much. I would have never done this if I didn't see this video." And I'm a softie. I'll be the first to admit it. I literally sat back, tears in my eye, and I'm like, holy God, wow. I changed somebody's outlook. I may have changed somebody's life. And to me, that means more than anything in the world. If you remember the old movie, The Sixth Sense, right, with Bruce Willis, right? So he got this award in Philadelphia that was the Psychologist of the Year award at the beginning of the movie. I called BS on that movie right from the beginning. We don't get those damn awards. You're not getting a best trauma therapist in the nation. You're not getting those awards. But what you do get is you get this feedback every now and then from somebody that says, "Hey, you mattered to me." And
Mm.
that humbles the hell out of me.
That's it, Dennis. You hit it right on too. And the number one thing is the connection. Like when I saw you, I wrote you. I don't like respond a lot to stuff on Facebook. I don't even post a lot except for, Instagram and all that for our what we're doing here. But the number one thing is the connection. It's like when I see something good, like if I write a review, it's going to be a good one about a company. Like, hey, I had the best service ever, and they'll know it through my tip too. Like I've tipped sometimes, like, you know what, I've got the best experience from this guy, and he deserves a really, or she deserves a really good tip. But the big thing is about that connection, and also, understanding that we can do this together, and also, why do we do this job? It's the why. Like we might deal with 100 different people and say the same thing, and then that one person comes back to us a year later saying, "You changed my life." Like that one little, and I don't even remember it because I have those stories in my life too that my mentors out there has said something to me that has stuck with me, and they might not even know how great made my life. But that's what we do this for, and it's that warming, good feeling. Like, hey, I'm really doing this some really good. I might not be saving everybody, right? But I'm making a difference in someone else's life and giving back what was given to me by somebody else in my same situation. It's a great thing.
Yeah.
Life is great.
Again, it really, it puts things in perspective. When somebody can
Mhm.
say that, you changed my outlook, you changed my life. Hey, I have a better marriage because of you. I have a better outlook on my job because of you. I don't feel terrible because of the things that you and I talk about. And I always tell folks, look, I'm your humble life guide. That's what I do. I help you through this. You're doing the hard work. But when they are appreciative, that's getting the gold star. You did the work, and when you put the work in and you genuinely put the work in, then people are going to notice you. Now if whoever comes out with the best trauma therapist in the nation award, I would like it to be a big medal with maybe a disco ball on it, just to.
It's nice. Yeah. And we don't we don't do this stuff to get kudos anyway, right? We
No.
don't do this just so we can get a pat in the back. It's like we do this from our heart, and this is what we love to do, our passion. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
great. I would like to ask you, Dennis, so what gives you hope for the future of mental wellness in the first responder communities? And what is your vision of where this field is heading to?
That wow, those are two great questions. Um, my hope is more and more first responders are going to understand that they have the experience, they have the skills necessary. They just need to get the education. They just need to go in, get the certifications, get the license, and help, the brothers and sisters out there. And if they could do that, I think it's great. And I'm starting to see that. I'm starting to see that trend that they understand, or at least what I see, they understand they can make the best helpers for a very specific population. Trends in and of itself are tough, and we have to look at how everybody has called, especially after the pandemic. Everybody calls and says, we need, mental health right now. Well, if you look at getting licensed, you're anywhere from 8 to 12 years to be a licensed clinician. So, after you get your bachelor's, your master's, or your LCSW, or you go to your PhD or whatever it is, when you say today is a decade from now to get going. I told this to my class the other day. Said if we look at the average age of therapist, just out of that 225,000 in the United States right now, the average age is in the high 50s, low 60s, so 59 to 60 at this point. We have what's called the graying out of our population, although my hairdresser would tell you differently. But there is a graying out of the population, which basically means is that clinicians are getting older and older. So we have to somehow break that barrier to get the younger folks to understand that just hang in there, get the education, get the experience, and you're going to be there. Now, the weird, funny statistic was the average age of an ER physician was 33. So, I don't know. I always question anybody that tells me anything about my health that when their birth date starts with 2000, if your birth date doesn't start with 19, you're really not going to tell a Gen Xer much, but what have you. So my hope for the future, my outlook is positive, we just need to do a little bit more work. I think clinicians need to do a little bit more work to start building a mindset into the younger population. And you'll hear this first, if you haven't heard it anymore, I do believe millennials are the answer to some of this. I really do believe everybody, takes a big old dump on the millennials, but I won't. I think the millennials can recover from some of their thoughts and be able to be the future of mental health therapy.
Yeah, I agree too. And I think a big thing is to know your history, know things that happened before you were born, and stick with it and don't give up. And do this with the passion that you have. If you have a passion to work with first responders, military, that's whatever you're dealing with. Put that in there and just don't give up on it and be legit. I work with a lot of first responders every single day, hundreds within the last several years, and one of the big things is like, well, my therapist is like, my daughter's older than my therapist. She's 25, 26 years old. And I say, look, then sit with it then. Then sit with them and see where it goes from there. Just try not to have that transference going on. And if you can't handle it, then find an older therapist. Maybe that's your answer, but give them a shot at least, right? Try not to use that judgmental stuff to
You know,
negate their therapy.
us therapists don't do ourselves we actually do ourselves a disservice because we believe, we're one of those professions that age gives us wisdom, right? We're these weird, Game of Thrones characters, I think. The older we get, the more wisdom we have and so forth. Well, I think it's our responsibility to share that wisdom. It's our responsibility not to just blow someone off and say, well, you don't understand. It's our responsibility to talk to somebody and tell them how to understand. When I have younger therapists that do come to me and say, hey, how can I get to the level that you're going to get? I would say, well, first we have to give you severe nightmares. No, we don't do that. But I tell them, it's like, look, you're going to do ride-alongs. You're going to be, in those firehouses. You're going to be with a paramedic. You're going to sit in an ER. You have to gain that experience. And they'll look at me, but what's that going to do? And I said, look, it's about perspective. Is that if you can understand a hardship that somebody's going through that goes beyond what the therapy session room is, then you're going to understand a multitude of things that people won't tell you, but will eventually tell you when you crack the code. And so I think we do a disservice. I think we get to a level where we stop talking to the younger ones, the younglings. We need to talk to them. I don't I don't know where some of that's going to go. My hope is that the trend continues, that we will want to put in the work and we will want to work with first responders. Society is a very, very fickle thing, and society one minute will love the police, the next minute hate the police. I remember a time, I think we all probably remember a time where EMTs and paramedics did not have to wear bulletproof vests, and
Yeah,
now they do. And
yeah.
it's, they're more tactical response to things. And so society's fickle. So hopefully the trend will continue that people do want to work in the trauma field. I hope the trend ends of people using PTSD as a verb. We're not PTSDing. I do hope the trend that not every single person in the world feels traumatized and understand that they're just being offended over things. I think that's going to legitimize certain things. I had this debate with somebody and they used the word, I think I have PTSD because the barista got my Starbucks order 5 times wrong. And I went, I I don't know what to do with you right now, and so when you start hearing these trends, I hope they end, but I hope the trend of people calling for more mental health continues.
100%, 100%. And we really love having you on here,
Thank you.
man. Definitely,
Yeah, this is
definitely.
great. This has been absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah. Yep. And Jim, you want to wrap it up here?
Yeah, sure. Dennis, real quick. I know I've got your website up, DennisCarradin.com.
Yeah.
Where else can folks find you? I'm going to take some notes and I'll do an outro for us.
Sure. DennisCarradin.com will give you access to a lot of things. Go to the Trauma Survivors Foundation.org. Great new program that we're running out. It's Manager Jen. She's working on it. We're actually going to be doing e-learning on the website. So 10 to 15 minute e-learnings that we'll have some open access one. We'll have some subscriber one that should be coming there shortly. Go to my TikTok. It is at Dennis Carradin Jr. And it's the same for Instagram and for Facebook. You'll see it. It's at Dennis Carradin Jr. Or follow us on the Trauma Survivors Foundation on all platforms. The more that you come in and look, here's the thing. If I always take constructive feedback, if there's something on there that I said that doesn't resonate with you, send me a DM. Tell me like, hey man, you were way off on this. Okay. And let's talk about it so I can be back on track with it. I try to tell the truth. I think it's funny, TikTok tends to be a little bit more forgiving. Like Facebook right now is a dumpster fire. If you haven't figured that out right now, it is a dumpster fire of negativity. TikTok tends to be a little bit more forgiving on things, and people will ask you questions and try to clarify whatever. I haven't really gotten tons of negative things on TikToks, but I post to all sites, so make sure you follow.
Awesome. Is there anything, Dennis, you wanted to say that you hadn't had the chance yet, or you just remembered?
Yeah, I don't think so. No, I think that's, oh my God, this has been great. You guys have been amazing.
Thank you, and we'll put you out there. We'll stay connected. Definitely, I'd love
Get
to
Jen
have
on. That would be great. Oh,
Yeah, why not? Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll have. Yeah, definitely. We love that because it's all about connection. It's
Yeah,
all
oh,
about
yeah.
staying connected. And moving forward in all this because it is in the recovery field, in the mental health field. This is a new venture we're dealing with,
Sure.
especially with the internet and all this stuff and the different ways we are able to communicate with other people. So we really love having you on here.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Again, guys, please keep in touch with us. We'd love to come back and do it. And whatever specific that you need, if it's even with an event that you want to break down and discuss.
Ladies and gentlemen, that man right there, Dennis Carradin, a licensed professional counselor of mental health, nationally certified counselor, a board-certified expert in traumatic stress, and a diplomat for the American Academy of Experts in Traumatic Stress. There's so much to this man's background. I'll give you a couple of highlights. First off, you'll find him on his website, www.DennisCarradin.com, DennisCarradin.com, where you will find all of his different platforms to locate more about him. He is the executive director of New Perspectives Incorporated, a private counseling agency in Delaware, and he served on the faculty of Penn State University, their Brandywine campus, for 15 years. Dennis is a trained trainer for Crisis Care Network and CEO of the Trauma Survivors Foundation, and a published author with such titles as Beyond the Call, A First Responder's Guide to Unbreakable Well-Being, The First Responder's Guide to Self-Care and Resilience, and Own Your Bullshit. Dennis, thanks for coming on the show today. We look forward to having you on again. And don't forget, fly, Eagles fly.
Go Birds. That was the battle cry last night at the Flyers game. It was great. Then as we were walking down the halls, everybody's going, "Go Birds!"
I'm gonna take every little bit of that out. I'm gonna make a reel like Dennis had on TikTok. It's gonna be great, Jim.
Awesome.
Would you
Yeah,
mind?
make it rip, Mike. I need your help big time on that one. Dennis, I hope you enjoyed being with us. I got to tell you something, man. I don't like Mike anymore. I have a new best friend in you. So thank you.
Well, right on, man.
You guys
And Dennis,
have been awesome. You guys have
It's
absolutely been awesome. I do.
Awesome.
I absolutely love this. This has been great.
Awesome. Let's all stay in touch and let's get him back on again. And if we can ever be of service to you, Dennis, don't hesitate, brother.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
And everybody listening out there, if you're going through struggles, you're going through some problems, you can reach out to Dennis. You can reach out to Jim. Maybe not reach out to me now because Jim doesn't want to work with me anymore. But, we all go through things. And the big thing we can remember is to halt and call for backup.
Don't get fooled again.